Never happened before in the history of Canada.
Tonight, the provincial and territorial leaders hold their annual meeting, and the location is a First Nation.
We've been getting winter bark in June and July, which is not normal. It's not normal.
And a Mi'kmaq family that makes birch bark canoes, worries climate change might hurt their tradition and their business. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The Facebook messages seemed like it was an old friend attempting to reconnect. But Bethany May-Tawashin did not recognize the name of the person texting her and was weary. It was from an account under the name Charles Forbes, and it had no profile picture.
I was wondering, who is this and why are they calling me by my name?
He asked her to guess who he was and dropped hints like saying she's seen him wear feathers and he's been in the news. She guessed twice and he fed more clues. Then the texter said they had met at the restaurant where she worked and taken a selfie together. That's when she guessed Arlen Dumas. They had taken a selfie together back in February 2018. The texter replied, "Yes, man, you're good." He asked her for her phone number, but she did not reply. However, her phone number was visible on her profile, and the texter began to write her from a phone number, which the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs has since confirmed belongs to Grand Chief Dumas.
Asking her to hang out.
I felt really weirded out. Why are you messaging me on a fake profile, I thought. And I tried my best not to make conversation.
Bethany wanted to forget about it. She told her partner, but the incident only went public Tuesday when she agreed to let her partner post the text on Facebook.
When we don't come forward, we're like enabling them to continue doing what they're doing.
Dumas has spoken to this type of behavior at a speech he gave at the opening of the MMIWG hearings in 2016.
You may have heard of all of the stories that have come out recently out of Hollywood around the movie mogul Harvey Weinstein. It's alleged that he has spent his whole career sexually harassing and assaulting young women. It has dominated the weekend's news cycles. And on Twitter, men have started the hashtag, "I believe you." Well, I believe you.
APTN reached out to Dumas and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs on Tuesday. They responded with a public statement today. I was informed that there had been some concerning Facebook posts attributed to me. These posts are not mine and appear to have originated from a fake Facebook account. Posts of a screenshot appearing to show some text from my cell phone are also not mine, but a spoof text. The AMC Secretariat says they have initiated processes to validate email addresses and social media accounts. There is no word on who the culprit may be or how the texter knew personal details of Dumas and May-Tawashing's chance meeting at the restaurant. May-Tawashing is asking the AMC to investigate further. Beverly Andrews, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A second woman has also come forward. Toronto area doula Shannon Jennifer said she was contacted through a Facebook account that was in Arlen Dumas' name in 2016. Jennifer said she didn't know Dumas, but he sent her repeated messages saying, "Nice pics" or "Have a nice day," an Arlen Dumas Facebook account on Messenger. The messages stopped, she said, when he became Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief in 2017 and deleted his personal Facebook account. In other news, it was a first for provincial and territorial premiers and a first for First Nations, because day one of this year's premiers meeting was hosted on Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan. APTN's Priscilla Wolf was there and has more.
Big River First Nation in Saskatchewan was the site for the first day of this year's Premier's meeting.
It's never happened before in the history of Canada.
It was the first time in Canadian history that a Premier's meeting was held on a First Nation. Assembly of First Nations National Chief was in attendance to help steer the discussions on the recent passing of Bill C-92.
It's all about jurisdiction. You know, when you read C-92, it talks about occupying the field and putting the needs of the child first, focusing on prevention as opposed to apprehension. And there's a 12-month time frame window, you know, that if things don't change, the First Nations Child and Family Services Act will come into play, or you know, that jurisdiction will be respected. But it's all about working together.
Premier of Saskatchewan Scott Moe says the discussions were how to move forward and what are the next steps now that Bill C-92 has passed.
How do we move forward and what are the next steps in moving forward, and really a focus on, as we move forward, to remain and keep focused on the children, that this legislation is formed to ultimately protect.
Premier Moe said children and care isn't the only focus for First Nations communities.
It led to a broader discussion as well on engagement in general and engagement with our First Nations communities in the general economy, our Canadian economy, understanding that there is one economy in this nation, that we are all engaged in one economy on this globe, really.
Chief Bruce Warren of Big River First Nation says he was honored to host an event in his community.
Today was an eye-opener, you know, being able to sit at a meeting of such important people of this great nation of ours, and you know, just listening to the dialogue that they have and realizing that a lot of the issues that we have in areas like our First Nations community are similar right across the country.
The premiers are in Saskatoon today to wrap up their annual meeting. Priscilla Wolfe, APTN National News, on the Big River First Nation.
And we'd like to hear what you have to say. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptn news. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. Nations, along with the City of Vancouver and environmental groups, have filed appeals in the recent decision to approve the Trans Mountain Pipeline. They say they want the project quashed once and for all. APTN's Tina House has that story.
West Coast environmental law lawyer Eugene Kung is once again preparing to go to court to represent his clients who are opposing the Trans Mountain expansion project.
Squamish, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coldwater, the City of Vancouver, the Federation of BC Naturalists, Chief Ron Ignace and SSN, and Aichlitz, Skokwai, the Chikwayak tribes. These 9 cases at least are asking the Federal Court of Appeal for leave or permission to have their judicial reviews heard. So the next step would be that the Federal Court would make a decision after hearing from Trans Mountain about whether there should even be permission granted. And then later down the road, they would have a conversation or make a decision about whether to join them.
Kung says there are a number of reasons for the judicial review's request.
The kind of broad legal grounds that they are challenging are first and foremost the constitutional grounds, inadequate consultation, accommodation, and seeking of consent of those nations. Many layers to that, and I think as we know, each one will be judged on its individual circumstances and merits.
Chief Leah George of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation says it's like deja vu once again as they join others to try and stop the Trans Mountain expansion once and for all.
We know there isn't enough science to say how bitumen can be cleaned up. We know that it sinks. We know that they can't recover it all, and we know that there needs to be additional studies.
Chief George also says their concerns over the resident southern killer whale population who have been spotted in these waters in the last few months was also not addressed.
They talked about the ocean protections plan that was occurring out in the Salish Sea, which is quite a distance from where we are, so it isn't actually benefiting the southern resident killer whale in here.
Trans Mountain provided this statement. The Trans Mountain Expansion Project has approval from the Government of Canada and the National Energy Board, subject to 156 conditions that we are committed to meeting. The federal government, who also happens to own the project, has said the project is currently in the construction phase. Tina House, APTN National News, North Vancouver.
Coming up, a new report confirming well-known statistics on Indigenous children and poverty. Stick around. Here's a look at Thursday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 16 and showers for St. John's, sunny and 28 in Fredericton. Rain in Nain with a high of 9, 13 with showers for Happy Valley Goose Bay. 32 is the high for Montreal, 30 under the sun in Val-d'Or. 31 and sunny for Toronto and Peterborough, 32 and sunny skies for Ottawa. Showers and 24 in Thunder Bay, 31 with showers for Kapuskasing. 21 in Puckatawagan, rain, and 23 for God's Lake. Rain for Winnipeg with a high of 24, 25 in Princess Harbor. 26 under sunny skies for Saskatoon, Swift Current, and Regina. 20 with showers for Meadow Lake and La Ronge. Welcome back. This week was the 30th anniversary of an all-party resolution to end child poverty by the year 2000. Now the Upstream think tank released a report they call Towards Justice, tackling Indigenous child poverty in Canada, and it paints a damning picture. We spoke earlier with co-author David McDonald. David, thanks for joining us. Indigenous child poverty, unfortunately, is a well-known fact. What is there that's new to report on?
Well, what's interesting about Indigenous child poverty is that you'll be shocked to know Statistics Canada believes it doesn't exist either on reserves or in the North. The official poverty definitions don't apply on reserves and they don't apply in the North. And so in this report, we custom ask Statistics Canada to provide those to us to give us the stats that we have in this report. And so what the report reveals is that there's really 3 tiers of child poverty in the country. The first tier, the worst tier, is for Status First Nations children, where you've got a child poverty rate of about 50%. The second tier includes the other Indigenous groups, so First Nations non-status, Inuit, and Métis, but it also includes other historically disadvantaged groups, racialized children, and children of recent immigrants. There you see poverty rates of in the 20 to 35% range. And once you pull those groups out, for the rest of the population, it's 12%. And so you just see a huge range of poverty rates, the worst of which being for Status First Nations children.
Right. So the report does say that between 2006 and 2016, the poverty rates of First Nations and Métis children have improved slightly. Why do you consider that somewhat problematic?
Well, there's different breakdowns here. So if you look at the on-reserve population, so First Nation status on reserve, we're actually seeing very little change there over the past decade. If we look at Inuit population, Inuit children, again, very little change there in terms of child poverty. What we are seeing is a decline in child poverty rates among Métis children as well as non-status First Nations. One of the complicating factors there is that we've also seen those populations grow dramatically over that period, much more than could be explained by natural birth rate. And so likely what's happening is people are discovering heritage and checking off that box on the census, and they may be higher income than the folks that checked that box off in 2006. And therefore they might be pulling the average up, therefore complicating those figures, unfortunately.
The report suggests a target of 50% reductions in poverty by 2030. What's the best way to achieve that?
Well, Canada at the national level has a poverty reduction strategy plan. The goal is to reduce poverty by 20% by 2020 and then by 50% by 2030. Now, what we argue in the report is that in places where we know poverty is particularly high and among particular identities, we should have specific targets that don't just apply nationally to everybody, but also apply to specific targets, like, for instance, reserve poverty rates on reserve. And so we should have specific targets there that we want to reduce those extremely high child poverty rates also by 50% over that same period to match the national goal. One of the big challenges with Indigenous child poverty is because a lot of Indigenous people either live on reserve or in the north, and they're not included in these Statistics Canada's definitions. You end up missing them in the official counts. There aren't the regular updates on those poverty rates, and so if there are big increases in poverty, nobody knows about it because they're just not included in these poverty counts.
On the title page, it says it's time for a fair share of the wealth. Is current political will, both federally and provincially, enough to reduce poverty in half in just 11 years?
Well, we certainly have seen a change at the federal level on the child poverty front via the Canada Child Benefit. We have seen a decline in child poverty rates as a direct result of the Canada Child Benefit. Unfortunately, we can't see what the impact is on reserves or in the north because we don't have annual income surveys there. We can only see it in census years. And so hopefully there will be an impact there that we will see declines on reserves. I mean, you look at, for instance, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, you've got child poverty rates on reserves there at 65%. I mean, this is just devastatingly high child poverty rates. Right. And those aren't even, I mean, they're custom calculated in our report, but they are not included in the national figures. The other piece of this, though, is that there are actually reserves in remote and rural areas that have relatively low child poverty. Look at the James Bay Cree, for instance, or the Nunavik Inuit in northern Quebec. That region of northern Quebec, governments there share in resource revenue from Hydro-Quebec's dams in that area, and as a result, they've been able to supplement lacking income from the federal government from these other programs, provide better social programs and so on, and as a result, they have child poverty rates that are below the national average despite being fairly rural and fairly remote.
David, we'll have to leave it there, but I appreciate you coming on and speaking with us about this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A Mi'kmaq family that makes birch bark canoes worries climate change might harm their tradition and their business. That story and more is still to come. Here's the rest of Thursday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Sunny skies and 25 for Fort McMurray. Rain and 25 in Peace River. 28 under the sun for Medicine Hat. 24 and sunny in Calgary. On the west coast, 23 under the sun for Campbell River and Vancouver. 29 and sunny in Kamloops. 29 under the sun for Fort Nelson. Rain and 24 for Dease Lake. 19 and sunny for Old Crow. 26 with rain in Mayo. 25 under the sun for Fort Liard and Trout Lake. 21 in rain in Yellowknife. A high of just +2 with showers in Sax Harbor. Showers in 4 in Pawlatuck. 17 with rain for Arviette. 15 in Whale Cove. 16 for Chesterfield. 17 and sunny in Pangerton. Welcome back. A Mi'kmaq family has been making traditional birch bark canoes for generations, passing the knowledge to keep their tradition alive. But they have noticed the forest is changing, and as Angel Moore reports, that is changing traditions.
In my little birch canoe, I paddle out the
Nagi and her brother are on their traditional land to learn family knowledge that goes back for generations. How to harvest birch bark to make traditional Mi'kmaq canoes and containers.
I'm really hoping the spirits and my ancestors come and help get the birch bark.
Their grandfather, Todd Labrador, is determined to keep that knowledge alive. He has found the perfect birch tree to harvest. He offers tobacco and gives thanks, but
climate change has really affected how I harvest.
He says the seasons are mixed up.
Mid-May is last you can get winter bark, and probably in September, end of September, October, you'll start getting winter bark again. We've been getting winter bark in June and July, which is not normal. It's not normal.
Traditional knowledge runs deep in the woods for the Labrador family. They are traditional Mi'kmaq birch bark canoe makers. The trees give bark, wood, medicines, and life to the forest. But every season it is getting harder to find the right tree. Melissa Labrador, Todd's daughter, also sees the changes in the forest.
another 5 or 10 years, are we even going to be to the point where we are collecting birch bark still? Are the trees going to be dead at that point?
She has noticed less trees, plants, and birds.
You know, the materials that we collect are affected by climate change, by, you know, chemicals in our environment. I always wonder about spraying that's being done over the forest.
And she hopes her children will be able to teach Mi'kmaq traditions to their children, but she is concerned the forest is dying.
In all honesty, my father could very well be the last of the canoe builders that is able to harvest locally and, you know, and carry on this art.
Todd says he noticed 10 years ago it has been a struggle to get the bark off the tree.
The tree right now should be the bark should be coming off extremely easy. We shouldn't have to pry it at all. Should just make the cut and it should open up and we should be out of here in about 15 minutes.
Todd says it is a challenge to keep traditions alive.
What has been taught to me traditionally doesn't work anymore, because what my father taught me, it's not the same as what I can teach my grandchildren, because things are changing. So what my father taught me, I really have to adjust.
And as we swiftly float along, we sing our river song.
The bark harvested will be used next year to build a traditional Mi'kmaq canoe. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Keji-Makujik.
Great voice there. You may remember the story of the young Mi'kmaq woman from Eskasoni in Nova Scotia. Emma Stevens did a rendition of the 1970s Beatle hit Blackbird, the Mi'kmaq language. The video she made went viral, being viewed millions of times. One of those viewers was Paul McCartney, one of the last 2 living Beatles. He acknowledged Emma Stevens at his concert in Vancouver this past weekend.
You probably have heard it, but there's a beautiful version on the internet by a girl called Emma Stevens, and she sings it in the native language.
Emma Stevens' version of Blackbird is sung in Mi'kmaq. It was recorded by Stevens and her classmates to highlight the United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages. McCartney told the large crowd that he met Stevens on Saturday before his show. Lucky lady. That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday. For more, including additional details on the allegations involving a Manitoba Grand Chief, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and stay up to date by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ford. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.